Hi, I'm Madison. I'm a preschool teacher here in Denver, and I love what I do. There's something magical about watching 4-year-olds discover that they can read their first word, or seeing their faces light up when they finally master tying their shoes. But at my sister's wedding 3 months ago, she called me the family's biggest mistake in front of 200 guests. And what happened next? Well, let me just say that sometimes the person everyone thinks is broken is actually the only one brave enough to see the truth. Have you ever been publicly humiliated by your own family? Because if you have, you'll understand exactly how I felt when my sister Emma grabbed that microphone. The morning of Emma's wedding started like a fairy tale. The venue was this gorgeous country club overlooking the mountains, with white roses everywhere and string lights that made everything look like a movie set. Emma had been planning this day for 2 years, and honestly, it was perfect. She was marrying David Richardson, successful investment banker, drives a Tesla, lives in one of those houses where the kitchen island costs more than my annual salary. The kind of guy our mother had always dreamed one of her daughters would bring home. I'd driven down from Denver the night before, staying at a budget motel because the family hotel block was, quote, at capacity, which was Mom's polite way of saying they didn't want to pay for my room. I didn't mind. I was just happy to be included. Emma and I hadn't been close lately, not since she'd made it clear that my life choices were, in her words, embarrassing to discuss at dinner parties. See, while Emma was climbing the corporate ladder and dating men with trust funds, I was a 26-year-old single mom working 2 jobs. My daughter Lily was 4, the light of my life, but apparently also evidence of my poor decision-making skills. Emma never said it directly, but the way she'd changed the subject whenever Lily came up spoke volumes. The wedding ceremony itself was beautiful. Emma looked stunning in her designer gown. $8,000 she'd mentioned at least 5 times during the planning process. I sat in the back row, wearing a dress I'd bought at Target and praying the hole near the left shoulder wasn't visible. When the minister asked if anyone objected, there was this perfect silence filled with bird songs and distant traffic. Everything felt so official, so right. But it was at the reception where the fairy tale turned into something else entirely. The seating chart had me at table 12, the very last table, tucked behind a decorative pillar where I could barely see the head table. My dinner companions were distant relatives who kept asking me questions like, "So, what do you do for work?" with that particular tone that suggested they already knew I wasn't successful. I smiled and answered politely, cutting my rubber chicken and wondering if I could sneak out before the speeches started. I should have trusted that instinct. When Emma stood up to give her thank you speech, she looked radiant. The lights caught her diamond earrings, a wedding gift from David's parents, and her smile was camera-ready perfect. She thanked the vendors, the wedding party, the families who'd traveled from out of state. Standard wedding speech stuff. I was actually relaxing, thinking maybe this would be okay. Then she said, "You know, people often ask me about success, about how to build the life you want. And I always tell them the same thing. Some people marry rich, some people work hard, and some people—" She paused, and I swear she looked directly at me. "Some people just raise mistakes." The words hit me like a physical blow. 200 people turned to follow her gaze, their faces shifting from wedding-appropriate smiles to something between confusion and uncomfortable entertainment. I felt my cheeks burn red, that awful heat that starts in your chest and spreads until even your ears are on fire. But she wasn't done. "I mean," Emma continued with a little laugh that sounded like breaking glass, "we all make different choices, right? Some of us plan our futures, set goals, choose partners who can provide stability. Others just, well, they follow their hearts off a cliff and then wonder why they're bleeding." The nervous laughter from the crowd was worse than silence would have been. These people, our extended family, David's colleagues, Emma's sorority sisters, they were all looking at me like I was some cautionary tale being presented for their moral education. That's when Mom decided to join in. My mother, Patricia Williams, stood up from the head table in her mother-of-the-bride dress that cost more than my rent. She'd had exactly 3 glasses of champagne, which was her sweet spot for saying things she'd later claim were just jokes. "Oh, Emma, Mom said into the microphone, her voice carrying that particular blend of affection and condescension she'd perfected over the years. "You're being too kind. At least Madison's mistake wore shoes today." The crowd erupted. Not the polite wedding laughter you hear during good-natured roasts, but genuine belly laughs. Like Mom had just delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke instead of publicly shredding her own daughter's dignity. I looked down at my feet, at the black flats I'd polished that morning because I couldn't afford new shoes. They were comfortable, practical shoes that I wore to work every day, where I spent 8 hours chasing toddlers and teaching them kindness. Suddenly, those shoes felt like evidence of every way I'd failed to live up to my family's expectations. "Madison," Emma's voice cut through my humiliation, "don't look so serious. It's all in good fun. You know we love you." That phrase, "it's all in good fun." It's the universal code for, "I just hurt you deliberately and now I'm going to gaslight you into pretending it didn't happen." I'd heard it my whole life whenever Emma or Mom decided to use me as their personal stress ball. "Come on," Mom added. "Don't be so sensitive. It's Emma's special day." And there it was, the final twist of the knife. Not only had they publicly humiliated me, but now I was the villain if I didn't smile and take it gracefully. I was supposed to laugh along with my own degradation, to be a good sport about being called a mistake in front of everyone I'd ever known. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. Every eye in that reception hall was on me, waiting to see what the family disappointment would do next. Would I cause a scene? Storm out dramatically? Start crying and prove that I really was as unstable as they'd implied? Instead, I reached up and touched the silver bracelet on my wrist. This bracelet, it was the only thing I had left from my grandmother, my mom's mother, who'd passed away when I was 15. Grandma Rose had been the one person in our family who never made me feel like I needed to apologize for existing. She'd given me this bracelet on my 14th birthday, a simple silver chain with a small heart charm that she'd worn every day of her adult life. "Dignity isn't something people give you, Madison," she'd told me that day, fastening the clasp around my wrist. "It's something you claim for yourself, and once you claim it, nobody can take it away unless you let them." I thought about that bracelet, about Grandma Rose, about the 4-year-olds in my classroom who looked at me like I hung the moon because I helped them sound out words and tied their shoes when the loops wouldn't cooperate. I thought about my daughter Lily, who was spending the weekend with my neighbor Mrs. Chen because I couldn't afford a babysitter but didn't want to bring a child to what I'd hoped would be a grown-up family celebration. Those people, my students, my daughter, Mrs. Chen, who brought us soup when Lily had the flu, they saw value in me that my own family couldn't recognize. They saw a woman who worked hard, who cared deeply, who showed up every day trying to make the world a little bit better for the kids in her care. But Emma and Mom? They saw a mistake in Target shoes. The silence stretched on. Emma was still holding the microphone, her perfect smile starting to look a little strained around the edges. Mom was checking her phone, probably already composing the story she'd tell her book club about how dramatic I'd been at the wedding. That's when David stood up. "I need to back up here and tell you something about David Richardson that Emma didn't know. Something that would change everything about this perfect wedding, this perfect man, this perfect life she thought she was building." 2 months earlier, I'd been at a conference for early childhood educators in Colorado Springs. During lunch break, I'd run into Sarah Martinez, a teacher I'd worked with at my previous school. Sarah had left education the year before to work in corporate training, and she was telling me about her new job at an investment firm downtown. "You'll never guess who I had to file a harassment complaint against last month," she'd said, picking at her salad. "This guy, David Richardson, total predator. Hits on every woman in the office, especially the younger ones. HR finally had to step in when he cornered 3 different assistants in the supply closet. The name hadn't clicked at first. Richardson is a common enough last name. But then Sarah had shown me the company directory on her phone, and there he was, David Michael Richardson, Senior Investment Advisor. The same David who'd been dating my sister for 8 months, who'd proposed with a ring that cost more than I made in 6 months, who Mom kept referring to as Emma's salvation. They moved him to a different floor and made him take some kind of sensitivity training, Sarah had continued, But between you and me, guys like that don't change. They just get better at hiding it. I'd tried to tell Emma, of course. 2 weeks before the wedding, I'd called her and carefully brought up what I'd heard. Not accusing, just suggesting she might want to ask some questions, maybe talk to David about his workplace relationships. "Madison," she'd said in that voice she used when she was explaining something to someone she considered intellectually inferior. "I know you're probably feeling jealous about my happiness, but spreading rumors about my fiancé is really inappropriate. David and I have talked about everything. He's told me about some misunderstandings at work. Apparently there are women there who misinterpret his friendliness, but that's not his fault." She'd hung up before I could respond, and the next day, Mom had called to lecture me about sabotaging Emma's relationship because I couldn't stand to see her happy. So there I was at the reception, watching my sister marry a man I knew was trouble, having just been publicly humiliated for caring enough to try to protect her. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a cake knife. But when David stood up at that head table, something in his expression told me he wasn't planning to join in the family roast. His face was pale, almost gray, and his hands were shaking as he reached for the microphone Emma was still holding. "Actually," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I need to say something." The change in the room's energy was instant and electric. Emma's smile faltered. Mom sat down heavily in her chair. The guests, who'd been chattering and laughing just moments before, went completely silent. "And me?" I was still standing by table 12, my hand on Grandma Rose's bracelet, about to witness the most spectacular plot twist in Williams' family history. David Richardson stood there at the head table, gripping the microphone like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The reception hall had gone from wedding celebration to crime scene quiet in about 3 seconds. Emma was staring at her new husband with a confusion that was rapidly shifting toward panic, and I could see Mom's publicist brain already calculating damage control strategies. "I can't do this," David said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying to every corner of that silent room. "I can't stand here and watch you tear down the only person in this family who actually tried to protect you, Emma." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody had noticed starting. Emma reached for the microphone, but David pulled it away, shaking his head. "Madison tried to warn you about me 2 weeks ago," he continued, and I felt my stomach drop through the floor. "She told you she'd heard things about my behavior at work, about complaints that had been filed. And you know what you did? You accused her of being jealous. You called her a saboteur." I watched Emma's face cycle through emotions like a slot machine. Confusion, denial, anger, and then something that looked dangerously close to understanding. The wedding guests were completely still, probably wondering if this was some kind of elaborate performance art. "The truth is," David's voice was getting stronger now, like confessing was giving him some kind of terrible courage. "Madison was right. There have been complaints. Multiple complaints. And not just misunderstandings or misinterpreted friendliness like I told you." He paused, running his free hand through his perfectly styled hair, destroying the look that had probably taken an hour to achieve. 3 weeks ago, HR at my firm put me on administrative leave pending a full investigation. I've been lying to you about working late, lying about business trips, lying about why I changed my phone number twice in the past month. The silence was so complete I could hear the air conditioning cycling on in the kitchen. Emma was frozen, her bouquet still clutched in her hands like she was afraid letting go would make everything real. "And yesterday," David continued, his voice breaking completely now, "I got the call. I'm being terminated. The investigation found evidence of inappropriate conduct with 4 different female employees over the past 2 years. There's going to be a lawsuit, probably multiple lawsuits." The implosion was spectacular and silent, like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Emma finally found her voice, but all that came out was a strangled, "What?" David set the microphone down on the table with a careful precision that suggested he was trying very hard not to completely fall apart. "I thought I could fix it. I thought if we got married, if I had this perfect life, maybe I could become the man you deserved. But sitting here, watching you humiliate your sister for trying to save you from me?" He shook his head. Madison is the only one in this room with actual integrity, and you just called her a mistake." That's when Emma started crying, not the pretty single-tear crying you see in movies, but the ugly, gulping sobs of someone whose entire world just shifted off its axis. Her mascara, waterproof, she'd specified to the makeup artist, apparently wasn't designed for this level of devastation. Mom jumped up from her chair so fast she knocked over her champagne glass. "Now wait just a minute," she started, but David held up his hand. "Mrs. Williams, with all due respect, you need to hear this too. Your daughter Madison has been supporting this family emotionally for years, while you and Emma treated her like she was an embarrassment. She works 2 jobs to support her child, volunteers at the community center on weekends, and still showed up here today hoping you'd finally see her worth. Instead, you used her as entertainment." I was still standing by table 12, feeling like I was watching this happen to someone else. Part of me wanted to run, to get in my car and drive back to Denver and pretend this whole day had been a bad dream. But another part of me, the part that remembered Grandma Rose's words about claiming dignity, knew I needed to stay and see this through. David turned to face me directly, and I could see that his eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and shame. "Madison, I owe you an apology. A real one. You tried to protect your sister, and I let her think you were the problem. I've spent months lying to the woman I claimed to love, and when the truth finally came out through someone else, I let her blame you for it." The wedding guests were starting to murmur now, that low buzz of people trying to process information that didn't fit any script they knew. I heard phrases floating through the air. Harassment allegations, administrative leave. Tried to warn her? Emma was still crying, but she was also staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't the condescending pity or frustrated disappointment I was used to. It looked almost like recognition, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "Madison," she said, her voice thick with tears and running makeup. I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me more? Why didn't you make me listen?" The question hit me harder than the original humiliation had, because the truth was, I had tried. I'd tried in that phone call, tried in the careful way you have to try when you're the family disappointment questioning the family success story. But I'd been trained my whole life to believe that my perspective was somehow less valid, that my concerns were probably just jealousy or drama. "I did try to tell you," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. "But you'd already decided that anything I said was suspect because I was the sister who'd made mistakes. You couldn't imagine that maybe my mistakes had taught me how to recognize red flags." Mom was still standing, looking between Emma and me like she was watching a tennis match played in a language she didn't speak. "This is all very dramatic," she said finally, "but perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No." The word came out of my mouth with more force than I'd intended, surprising everyone, including myself. "We're not doing this privately. Emma just called me a mistake in front of 200 people. David just admitted to sexual harassment in front of 200 people. If we're going to have our family dysfunction on display, let's at least have all of it." I walked toward the head table, past the other guests who were watching this unfold like it was the most fascinating reality show they'd ever seen. With each step, I felt something shifting inside me, like a lock clicking open after years of being stuck. "Emma," I said when I reached the front of the room, "you want to know why I didn't fight harder to make you listen? Because you trained me not to. Every time I had an opinion that differed from yours, you made it clear that I was being dramatic. Every time I questioned one of your decisions, you reminded me that I was the one with poor judgment. You spent years convincing me that my voice didn't matter, and then you're surprised when I don't use it loudly enough to save you from your own mistakes." Emma's face crumpled. "Madison, I never meant—" "Yes, you did." I wasn't angry anymore, which surprised me. I was just tired, bone-deep, soul-level tired of pretending that this family dynamic was normal or acceptable. "You absolutely meant it, and so did Mom when she made that joke about my shoes. You both meant every word because this is how we've operated for years. I'm the cautionary tale, the reminder of what happens when you don't make the right choices. Except tonight, the family success story just admitted to being exactly the kind of man I learned to avoid after making my supposedly terrible choices. David had sat down heavily in his chair, his head in his hands. The best man, some fraternity brother whose name I'd forgotten, was awkwardly patting his shoulder like he was trying to comfort a crying child. The thing is, I continued, looking directly at Mom now, I'm not actually a mistake. I'm a woman who had a baby young and decided to build a life around loving her unconditionally instead of being ashamed of her existence. I'm a teacher who helps other people's children learn to read and tie their shoes and believe in themselves. I work hard, I pay my bills, I volunteer in my community, and I raise my daughter to be kind and honest and brave. I touched Grandma Rose's bracelet again, feeling the familiar weight of the silver against my wrist. But most importantly, I've learned how to recognize the difference between people who love you and people who love controlling you. And David? He's exactly the kind of man I learned to avoid. Charming, successful on paper, but fundamentally unable to respect the women around him. Emma was really sobbing now, her perfect wedding makeup completely destroyed. I should have listened to you, she whispered. I should have believed you. Yes, I said simply, you should have, but not because I'm psychic or because I have better judgment than you. You should have listened because I'm your sister, and sisters are supposed to protect each other, even when it's inconvenient. That's when something unexpected happened. Emma stood up, her wedding dress rustling around her like a white silk storm, and she hugged me, not the polite, performative hugs we'd been exchanging for years, but a real hug, desperate and grateful and full of regret. I'm so sorry, she whispered against my shoulder. I'm so sorry I made you feel like you didn't matter. I'm so sorry I didn't listen. I'm so sorry I called you a mistake when you've been the strongest person in this family the whole time. Over Emma's shoulder, I could see the wedding guests starting to move around again, like the spell of frozen attention was finally breaking. Some were gathering their purses and heading for the exits. This was clearly more family drama than they'd signed up for when they RSVP'd. Others were lingering, probably hoping for more revelations. Mom was still standing there looking lost. For the first time in my memory, Patricia Williams didn't seem to have a plan or a response, or a way to spin this situation into something manageable. Mom, I said, still holding Emma, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to keep pretending that the way you treat me is acceptable just because it's family tradition. I'm not your family embarrassment or your cautionary tale or your comic relief. I'm your daughter, and I deserve the same respect you'd give to a stranger. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it again. I could practically see her brain working, trying to find a way to make this all make sense within her existing worldview. I don't, she started, then stopped. I never meant to make you feel unwanted, ashamed, like you wished I'd never been born, I supplied. Because that's how your jokes feel, Mom. That's what it means when you introduce me to your friends as my daughter who keeps me humble, or when you refer to Lily as Madison's situation instead of your granddaughter. Emma pulled back from our hug, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She's right, Mom. We've both been awful to Madison. We made her feel like she had to apologize for existing. David suddenly stood up, startling everyone. I should go, he said quietly. This family needs to heal, and I'm just making everything worse by being here. Emma turned to look at her husband of approximately 2 hours, and I could see her processing everything that had just happened. Where will you go? She asked. I don't know, he admitted. I'll figure it out. But Emma, you deserve so much better than what I can give you right now. Madison was right to try to warn you, and you were right to choose your family over me. He started to walk away, then turned back. Madison, I know this doesn't fix anything, but thank you for trying to protect her. I'm sorry I wasn't worth protecting her from. And then David Richardson walked out of his own wedding reception, leaving behind a room full of confused guests, a bride in a ruined dress, and a family that was finally, maybe, ready to start telling each other the truth. The aftermath was surreal. Emma and I spent the next hour in the bridal suite, helping her out of her wedding dress and into jeans and a sweater she'd packed for the honeymoon that wasn't going to happen. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years. She told me about the pressure she'd felt to be perfect, to be the daughter who made up for my mistakes. I told her about the loneliness of being treated like the family failure when I was actually proud of the life I'd built. Mom eventually joined us, sitting quietly in the corner chair, while Emma and I figured out what to do about the reception hall, the catering, the guests who were still lingering downstairs. When we finally had a moment of silence, she spoke up. "I owe you both an apology," she said slowly, "but especially you, Madison. I've been so focused on what I thought success looked like that I forgot to see what it actually looked like. You've been taking care of everyone around you while I've been criticizing you for not doing it the way I would have done it." It wasn't a perfect apology. There was still some defensiveness in it, still some implication that her way might have been better if I'd just tried harder. But it was a start. 3 months later, Emma and I talk on the phone twice a week. She's in therapy, working through what she calls her people-pleasing perfectionism. She's also job hunting because it turns out that working at a company that enabled David's behavior for years wasn't exactly fulfilling her career goals. Mom is trying, which is more than I expected. She stopped making jokes at my expense and has started referring to Lily by name instead of as Madison's situation. She even came to Lily's preschool graduation last month and cried when Lily sang her solo in the class song. As for me, I'm still teaching preschool, still working hard, still raising Lily to be kind and brave and honest. But now I'm also the sister who spoke up, the daughter who demanded respect, the woman who claimed her dignity and refused to let anyone take it away. Sometimes the family mistake turns out to be the only one strong enough to keep the family from making even bigger mistakes. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, they listen before it's too late to change course. But whether they listen or not, you still deserve to be heard. Grandma Rose was right. Dignity isn't something people give you. It's something you claim for yourself, one brave moment at a time. If you've ever been the family member who speaks uncomfortable truths, or if you've been dismissed for trying to protect someone you love, I want you to know that your voice matters. Your perspective has value, and sometimes being the family disappointment just means you're the only one brave enough to see things as they really are. Have you ever been in a situation where your family made you feel like your concerns didn't matter? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I believe you.